Far be it from me to stand between you and lunch for very long. So don't worry. This has just been such a rich morning already. Thank you, Ron and Rachel, for planning this. Thank you, Kate, for such a great way of framing this whole conference and experience. And to the presenters so far for some really beautiful kinds of serendipitous interactions between things. So before we move to lunch and then to this activity afterwards, I wanted to take a moment to describe a practice as a story, and then to extend an invitation to you. So I spent a good chunk of the summer of 2021 working on my first book proposal, and I thought that I was doing a good job of giving it attention. I thought about it all the time. I was like running through objects when I was doing dishes. I would be folding laundry, and I'd be like trying out different like topic sentences for things. I would go on walks. I was trying to be sort of Augustinian, so I would go on these walks and try to solve all of my problems by walking. But it turns out that in all of that walking, or all that thinking even, I wasn't really giving attention. I was circling, I was fretting, I was stewing, but the constancy of that internal rumination meant that I couldn't actually offer anything, my notice or my regard. And so what I really needed was a practice of attentiveness. So one day, I tried a seemingly silly exercise. I started my daily walk, and this dark purpley black color of a pokeweed berry sort of caught my attention. And so for the rest of the walk, I just looked for that color. I found it in leaves, in the trim of houses in my neighborhood, in French porch mums, in one custom no parking sign. And I felt a lot better after that walk. Like there were neurobiological reasons why, right? Like I strengthened connections between both hemispheres of my brain. I calmed my vagus nerve. We were no longer in fight or flight mode, all of those things. The practice kept me present in my body when all I really wanted to do was be in my head. So I did it again. This time with my favorite color, chartreuse, and I began the walk assuming that I would find this bright neon hue in things like construction signs and backyard soccer nets. But instead, I found it in creeping jenny tendrils, blazing star fronds, in coleus, fallen ash leaves. I was wrong, and I learned that I was wrong just by paying attention. So I started referring to this practice as contemplative color walking, that it wasn't a competition, it wasn't a game, it was an invitation to attention. And of course, this is not unlike the practices of some contemporary artists that many of you might be familiar with, right? So Byron Kim, for example, with his Sunday painting series, going out Sunday after Sunday to paint a sliver of sky and then writing down a sort of observation about the mundane there, really throwing into question the very idea that we could call anything, like our presumption in calling anything sky blue when you see all of his paintings together. And certainly the practice of Spencer Finch, who's really built like a whole body of work around looking for colors and sort of identifying them, moving them into other contexts. This is a detail from a collage that he made from walking around Walden Pond with a stack of postcards of Monet paintings. And so he would have circled a particular color on those Monet postcards and then found that color in Walden Pond and sort of like maps it all together as a collage. Some of you may have seen or will have the opportunity to go to the High Line here. And there's, of course, his installation, The River That Flows Both Ways, where he was on the Hudson River and took a photograph of the water, I believe once a minute, and then chose one pixel from that photograph to then turn into these colored panes of glass. And they now line the High Line. Okay? So, we have all of this sort of practice in contemporary art. Now, I will have to admit that sometimes I didn't feel like a pilgrim when I went on these color walks. Sometimes I felt a little spicier. Sometimes I felt like I was offering a little bit of a challenge to the divine. There was one day in particular where I was working on this project. I had just sent a sort of cold email out of the blue to a distinguished scholar asking if he would look at my project. And I was just so much anxiety. And so I went on a walk. And as sort of this, middle finger to the whole practice, I was like, I'm going to look for cerulean, because who's going to find cerulean in your neighborhood, right? And except that I did. I found so much of this color. It was in abundance where I expected it to be scarce. And the next day, the scholar emailed me back with such kind enthusiasm for my project. So I always tell my students, pay attention to what you pay attention to. Now, following your heart a la the fairy tale franchises is not an adequate or sustainable rule for life, but I do believe in divine prompting, the wisdom of self-reflection, what tacit knowledge is being woven together by the things that catch our eyes. What might we learn by allowing those connections to surface? So I've continued this practice in my neighborhood, but also sometimes when I visit museums, when I'm not sure why I'm at that museum or what I want to see. And so about a year ago, I was at the Mint Museum in Charlotte, North Carolina. And I didn't have long before my next commitment. But I had just been texting a friend who had received a really awful health diagnosis. Her bones were dying. There was no blood going to her joints. But I'm in this art museum, so what am I supposed to do? And so I start just sort of walking my way through the museum, and I found myself looking for Kate's color. I associate her with this crimson color, this color of courage. Is one that she talks about as being her courageous color, right? She wears red to her doctor's appointments. And so I looked at artworks as a whole, but I also allowed myself to sort of be guided by looking for this one hue, right? And so I found it in the jazz-like syncopations of the large stained glass windows in the central lobby. I found it as a purebred dog's leash, a fancy tablecloth, a luxurious gown, but also the smattering of autumn leaves and that tiny little feathered headdress of a Native American boy looking over his home. I found it in still life paintings and the tiniest little flash in an otherwise neutral, bland landscape. I found it in repeated dots and poured swaths and gestural marks. I found it, too, in flowers sprouting from a broken snail shell and in organs lovingly embroidered onto a stark medical photograph. And then, at the end, against all expectation, I found that same red, and you're going to tell me it's not the same red, but I swear it's just the photograph making it look like that. I found that same red threaded like marrow through these frosted glass sculptures. It looks like blood pulsing through something cold and dead. Now, none of these artworks were about my friend's diagnosis, but paying attention to the red of courage created space for me to grieve and pray when I needed it. As we've heard today, right, pilgrimage often involves a pilgrim ostensibly seeking one thing, only to learn through the process that they're actually looking for another. And I'm a researcher. I'm used to seeking from the stationary position of my standing desk. But what happens when we move our bodies? What knowledge might we create? So here is the invitation. After our lunch break, I invite you to meet us at the Cathedral of St. John the Divine. It's about a 15-minute walk from here. The restaurants that Ron and Rachel have suggested to us are sort of en route there. And so we'll meet there at 1:30, and embark not on an architectural or gallery tour, but on a pilgrimage, a journey of seeking and making connections. Perhaps even as you walk to lunch today, you might start to pay attention to what you pay attention to. Is it the little bits of still white snow, or is it like the grungy bits, right? Is it the bright red beanie of somebody that you see on the street, the perfect green of a deli menu? Or maybe you're more of a texture person. So maybe you find yourself noticing somebody's tweed or the taut gloss of a vinyl seat, the dimpled wood of a table. Maybe it's a shape. Maybe it's a negative space. Maybe it is an emblem of some sort. Regardless, at 1:30, we'll meet at the church. We do have a group ticket, so we're going to try to gather as many of you there together at once. And I have these, really proud of these, I have these handouts that I designed with a student that is, yes, in a meander fold, okay? To help guide our pilgrimage there. And the overview will be an invitation to allow ourselves to look, right, to be open to this practice. And then going into the museum, not as a big group, or going into the church, not as a big group, but you can do this by yourself. You can do it in small groups of 2s or 3s. Taking some time to just sort of like sweep through, 10 or 15 minutes, to just sweep through, sort of see what captures your attention. Is it a color? Is it a shape? Is it a negative space? Is it a texture? Something like that. And then to return to one object to begin with that you found that element in, to spend some time with it. And then to sort of map your way through the space again. There's places in here for you to draw. There is if I can find it, there's a blueprint of the cathedral in there as well if you want to map onto that, and some different prompts for looking and reflecting. And then we'll meet back here. We'll leave the cathedral at, I should have written all of this down in my actual notes. We'll leave the cathedral at 2:15-ish, if we can. We would like to be back here by 2:30, so that we have about a half hour to warm back up with coffee and tea, and then to do some time of reflection, to sort of share what it is that you saw, and maybe what tacit knowledge, what serendipitous connections kind of rose to the surface. So that's my invitation to you. You have to come to the cathedral if you want one of these fabulous meanderfold booklets. I think Rachel has a few more logistical words for us.